The New York Giants officially begin training camp practices this week. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, these are some of the bigger storylines of interest that we will be following.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. It's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI. Find us at newyorkgiantsonsi.com. And a welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, training camp, ladies and gentlemen, it starts this week. The Giants full team reports on Tuesday. The first practice is on Wednesday. We're going to hear from General Manager Joe Schoen. Brian Daboll's going to speak daily. We'll hear from the players. And there's a lot that has to be resolved in training camp. And we're going to talk about some of the big storylines, what we'll be watching, and what's of interest. And here to help me break that all down is good friend Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. Ed, we made it, man. We made it through the 6-week period, and it's here.
Yep, here we go again, Patty. Here we go again.
Yeah, what's this? What number is this for you? I think this is like 30-something for me. What's number is this for you?
Oh, I don't even know, Patty. My first training camp was 2008 with the Giants. So not nearly as many as for you, but still it seems like a lot.
But it never gets old, of course. So
of course not. We just get old, Patty. We just get old. Although I should speak for myself.
I was going to say, speak for yourself there, buddy.
Yep.
All right. So Ed, let's talk about some of the major storylines. And I want to start actually with Hard Knocks for a minute. You know, by the time we get to camp on Wednesday, episode 4 of Hard Knocks will have aired. And I wanted to get your take on how much you think the revelations shown in Hard Knocks may or may not affect training camp, you know, the discussions and all that sort of thing.
Oh, I'm sure that that when we get an opportunity to speak to Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll on Wednesday as camp starts, I'm sure that some of the discussion will be about some of the things that were said, not said, shown during Hard Knocks, but I can't imagine that really for players that it means all that much. I don't think it's that much of an issue, you know, in the locker room. I think, you know, these kinds of off-season decisions get made by every team every single year. It just so happens that we're hearing and seeing some of these, you know, for the first time. So I don't think it's going to be an issue in the locker room at all.
What about, though, you know, we've learned that the Giants did indeed inquire about trading for a quarterback. I can pretty much bet the ranch that topic is going to come up with Daniel Jones. You know, there's also going to probably be questions about what kind of, you know, how long of a leash is there on him? I mean, do you kind of view some of this stuff as a distraction, do you think, for, you know, at least in the beginning part?
Patty, I think whether we had seen them on Hard Knocks or not, I think we knew that the Giants had pursued the idea of trading up to number 3 for a quarterback. We knew that anyway. I think Daniel's already been asked about that, and I'm sure he'll be asked about it again. We know, and Jones knows what this upcoming year means to his career. I think Jones has already answered a lot of those questions. I think he'll answer a lot of them again. I think, I don't think it's a distraction for Daniel Jones. If anything, I think it's motivation. And it becomes an issue. When it becomes an issue, when the whole quarterback thing becomes an issue, is either when Daniel Jones gets hurt and Drew Lock comes in, if Lock plays well, or if things don't go well for the Giants, it's going to become a weekly, because of the injury guarantee, because at some point, if things don't go well, it'll become obvious that the Giants will have to move on from Jones. That to me is when it will become a weekly, hey, Dabes, when are you pulling the plug on Daniel? And that's when it becomes a distraction.
Right. Now, speaking of distractions, Stable is pretty good with shutting all that stuff down. So I want to talk, though, about changes that you might be anticipating seeing. Now, last year, I think you and I both agreed that the training camp was, I don't want to say soft, but it could have been a little bit more intense with how they approached it. What are you anticipating changing this year in training camp as far as how they prepare and, what we might see?
Well, Patty, I think that one of the things that we saw in Hard Knocks is Joe Shane clearly saying we can't start 0-3. We have those, when you look at the Giants' schedule, if they're going to be relevant in 2024, those first two games are critical. Minnesota at home, in a game, one of the very few games all season long where the Giants are going to be the betting favorite. And then a game against Washington, and I know that's Jaden Daniels and it's a new coach and it's a new start, but it's Washington, and those games are still, at this point, those games are always winnable for the Giants. I think last year you and I talked about this, Patty, and I've written it. I think the Giants were guilty of being so concerned about getting to the starting line healthy that I don't think they necessarily got to the starting line prepared. Going all the way back to the spring, we saw a lot of guys in red jerseys not practicing or barely practicing or hardly ever on the field. We didn't see the starting players much, if at all, in preseason games. I think if you go back to the OTAs and the mandatory minicamp that we saw, we've already seen a different approach. We've already seen these guys pushed a little bit harder. We've seen more guys on the field. We saw 7-on-7s throughout the entire spring. We didn't see any competitive periods at all last spring. All we saw was individual work. Maybe some 7-on-7 in mandatory minicamp, if I remember correctly, but we didn't see anything competitive all spring, and we saw competition. We saw competitive periods all spring. So I think there's a different approach, and I think we've already seen it. I think the Giants are going to push harder to be ready by week 1.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Now, speaking of which, Ed, we already got word that Theo Johnson will start on PUP. Who else might you be anticipating will start on PUP?
Well, we heard already it doesn't sound like Daniel Jones is going to start on PUP. Aaron Robinson, maybe. Not that matters at all, Patty, to be honest. But cross your fingers that Evan Neal isn't starting on PUP, because Evan Neal, and we all know the deal with Evan Neal. He needs every single rep he can get, and if he starts training camp on PUP, they might as well just put Jermaine Illuminor over at right tackle and be done with it, and just make the move, cut the tie, figure out who's going to play left guard, and be done with it. So, those are maybe the ones I would look at. The one I'm the most curious about is Neal.
Yeah, Neal, of course, I don't know about you, Ed, but in the springtime, he was doing some limited work, and then they dialed him back saying, oh, we wanted to back off so that he's ready for camp. That to me kind of was like, I don't want to say suspicious. I don't know if that's the right word, but it was surprising because usually you want to increase the work in ramping them up. So when they usually dial somebody back, usually that means something is up. I mean,
Well,
am I reading the situation wrong, you think?
absolutely not, Patty. I mean, what I had been told, what I found out really is that and I think we saw it in the spring. Evan Neal's ankle rehab from his surgery simply did not or has not gone as planned, or has not gone as well
Mm.
as it would have been hoped. So you cross your fingers that he's ready for camp, but as Brandon Thorne, of Trench Warfare told me on my podcast the other day, it becomes concerning when you've got a 6'7", 340 or 50-pound man who consistently has leg injuries. You need that
Mm.
lower half to be an effective offensive lineman in the NFL, and it's concerning when his lower half has not really been fully healthy in either of his 2 NFL seasons.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Coming up here on the Locked On Giants podcast, we're talking with Ed Valentine of Big Blue View, and we're going to talk about some emerging battles that we will be watching this summer in training camp. So please don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, Major League Baseball enters the second half of the season. The WNBA is in full swing, and pretty soon we'll have the Olympics and the return of the NFL, the NBA, and NHL. It's sports galore, which means there will be no shortage of action fueled by props, odds, money lines, and more to bet on. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, has you covered with a daily booster bonus all summer long. Just download the app, set up an account, and dream up your ideal bets anytime. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So go on and head on over to fanduel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, everybody, welcome back to Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. My special guest is Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. We are getting you ready for the start of Giants training camp. It starts Wednesday. And leading up to Wednesday here on the Locked On Giants podcast, those of you who are looking for the live show that we were supposed to do Friday, I do apologize. I had internet connectivity issues. I was without internet for over 24 hours. I'm hoping to get the live show out at some point this week. I'm not sure when, but coming up on the recorded shows, we're going to have Sean Stellato on the program, and I'll have one other program for you before we start getting into the daily camp reports. And basically, if the Giants are practicing, I will be here with a camp report for you. So speaking of camp, Ed, let's talk about some of the battles. There are quite a few, obviously, for starting positions, mostly for depth positions. What are some of the ones that you find most intriguing that you're going to really hone in on?
Well, I think, Patty, for me, one of those is at wide receiver. Really, I think that you have Malik Neighbors, you have Wan'Dale Robinson, you have Darius Slayton, you have Jalen Hyatt. And then for me, whether the Giants keep 6 or 7 receivers, I think almost anything goes when it comes to that. I mean, I think Isaiah Hodgins makes it over Allen Robinson. I think Miles Boykin makes it over Bryce Ford Wheaton. I think, although he did a really good job last year as a punt returner, my guess would be at this point, as we start camp, I think Isaiah McKenzie's got an advantage on Gunnar Olszewski for the simple reason that McKenzie can return punts and kickoffs, and McKenzie has been a better, more useful wide receiver throughout his career. But again, those are, anything could happen with those spots. So that's one that I'm looking at. I think when I look at tight end and I look at if the Giants keep a 4th tight end, I would assume it would be a blocking tight end. And In 1 minute, I think Chris Manhertz is probably the pick there. The next minute, I think it's Jack Stoll. So I don't, I don't know. Who knows how that one's going to turn out? Offensive line, Patty. I don't know about you, but as much work as Joe Shane did on the offensive line, I still think it's entirely possible that one or two of the players who end up on the roster, in September are not on the roster right now. So who knows?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, actually, one of my predictions for the offensive line is I wouldn't be shocked if somebody like maybe Marcus McKeithen landed on practice squad, didn't make the 53-man roster, given, what they want to do there with that offensive line. I mean, question-wise, who's the swing tackle right now? Is it going to be Matt Nelson? Is it going to be Josh Azudu? And then, what happens if Jermaine Illuminor now has to go to right tackle? Where did they put Evan Neal? I mean, to me, there's probably more question marks about that offensive line than any other position on this team, maybe with the exception of, like you said, receiver. But even there, like you were saying before, you can pretty much guess how that is going to shake out. But Ed, let's, we mentioned Evan Neal, he's going to have a short leash, I would think. Daniel Jones is probably going to have a short leash. What would you say would be the cut-off point for those guys to where if they're just not showing what they need to show, they're just not getting the job done, that the Giants say, okay, you know what? That's it. We're going in a different direction.
Oh, I think the leash has to be shorter on Evan Neal than on Daniel Jones, to be honest with you. I think that I know that you and I agree that the mess that the Giants made out of the offensive line last spring and last summer, they were to the point of changing the guard rotation like every 2 reps. They were running different guards in and out and moving guys from side to side, and that can't happen again, Patty. That can't happen where they go into practicing for the Vikings and not really knowing who their starting offensive line is, who their linemen are. You've got to settle that quickly. If Evan Neal can't get the job done, you've got to move Jermaine Illuminor to right tackle at some point in training camp. Give him a chance, although, he's a veteran. It shouldn't be that much of an issue. He's played there a lot, but give him a chance to settle in next to John Runyon and give yourself a chance to figure out who the left guard is. So I don't want to see them with Evan Neal. If they're going to pull the plug, do it in training camp. Don't do it in week 3, or week 2. Don't do what you did last year to Mark Lewinsky. Pull the plug after 1 week. I mean, that's just ridiculous. You were looking for an excuse to pull the plug, if you're doing that after week 1. So if you're going to do it to Neal, do it in training camp. Give yourself a chance to put together a cohesive unit. As for Jones, for me, I think I don't know if it's an 0-3 start, Patty, but for me, I think the plug gets pulled if and when the Giants realize that they're not going to be playing meaningful games in December, that they're not going to have a shot at the playoffs, and that they're just going to have to, move in a different direction next off season.
Sticking with Neal for a second, if they do say, okay, if he doesn't show us anything in the preseason, we're going to pull the plug, what do they do with him at that point?
That's a really good question, Patty, because there's an assumption that by some people that they would just slide him over and let him play left guard. And I think that's silly. All right. Maybe he could play left guard. Maybe. But he hasn't played left guard since his sophomore year at Alabama. And what is that now? 4 years ago? He hasn't played there. You can't just on August 20th decide that you're done with him at right tackle and say, oh, tomorrow you're the starting left guard. So maybe what happens is Evan Neal becomes the swing tackle at that point. I don't know. Maybe you work him at left guard and see if he can be useful there. Maybe you work him at the guard spots and see if he can be a little bit of a Josh Azudu, a multi-position sort of backup. But I think it's nonsense to think that you can just say, hey, tomorrow you're the starting left guard. That's not going to work. If anything, you pull the plug and you make a competition at left guard and you see if he can be part of that competition. But there's no guarantee that he'd be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you got to make that decision quick. And Brasillo, Carmen Brasillo, when he spoke to us in the spring, kind of hinted that Evan Neal would probably cross-train at guard. That's the impression, at least I got listening to him talk about, the situation, so just in case, like it doesn't work out or whatever.
But how much, Patty, does the idea that Evan Neal would cross-train at guard, how much does that get blown up by the reality that he basically didn't practice all spring? Remember that the other thing Brasillo said was the springtime was the time to cross-train, not training camp. Springtime was the time to move around and develop positional versatility. Once we get to training camp and we get into the middle of training camp, that's not the time for that.
Right.
So maybe it's entirely possible that the window to find out if Evan Neal can play left guard, it's entirely possible that window has already come and gone.
Right. Makes sense. Definitely. All right, Giant fans, we are talking with Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. We're getting you ready for training camp. When we come back, more training camp battles that we haven't yet talked about, surprises and expectations. So don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. They help you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but who might be open to the perfect role. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours when they use LinkedIn. And did you know that LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier? They've just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. Find out why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring by posting your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and I am joined by good friend Ed Valentine. And Ed and I are getting you ready for training camp. Starts Wednesday. Joe Shane will be speaking, as he does to start every training camp. He'll probably do a joint presser with Brian Dable. First 4 days of practice will be non-padded. Padded practices will start, I believe, on Monday, the following Monday. And Ed, one competition we haven't talked about that I think we need to, cornerback 2. Now, the coaches have said Cordell Flat is the guy. If the season were to start tomorrow, that would be their guy. But how secure do you think that position really is at this point?
I don't know that it's secure at all, Patty. And I would also put, to be honest, I think slot corner is also up for grabs. Nick McLeod, who last year throughout the spring, Nick McLeod was working at safety. And then he wound up playing a lot of outside corner last year. This year they drafted Drew Phillips in the 3rd round, pushed Cordell Flott to the outside. But it was McLeod who took most of the slot reps with the first team, during the spring. I think that might change I think as we get through camp, I think that might change, but I'm not 100% sure who the slot corner is or the second outside corner. I think they'd like it to be Cordell Flott, the second outside corner, but and Flott's a decent player. He's been decent, and amazingly, I think there's only two players on this Giants roster who are younger than Cordell Flott, and he's in his third year. I think that's Malik Neighbors by a year, or maybe 2 years, year and a half, and Jalen Hyatt by a month. So that's pretty amazing. But the fact of the matter is, Cordell Flott is still a 175-pound player. And that's tough when you're playing outside against bigger guys, when you're going to be asked to support the run, things like that. So I don't know. I tend to think that if the Giants are going to make a move this summer, if they're going to make a move of any real significance before the season starts, that it still might be for an outside corner.
Yeah, I mean, they tried to do it in the offseason. Steven Nelson, Darius Williams, who's the other one? Tre'Davious White. So they did try to bring in veteran help there, and now all of a sudden, we have confidence in Cordell Flott, and
of course they do, because he's the guy who's there, and they don't have a choice right now.
Yeah, exactly. At another competition, I don't think a lot of people are talking about, but maybe we should be. Who's going to be the 3 tech on the defensive line?
Your guess is as good as mine, Patty. Can you play it?
No, can you?
Not anymore. I don't think.
Maybe if we team up, the two of us can handle
maybe. It. I don't know, Patty. It's really, really interesting, because everybody talks about, the Giants have Kayvon Thibodeau, and they have Brian Burns on the edge, and they have Bobby Okereke, and Okereke's tremendous. Micah McFadden at the second inside linebacker really came on last year. And of course you have Dexter, who's all world. The guys just, nose tackles don't rush the passer the way that Dexter Lawrence does. It just doesn't happen. But everybody says, "Oh, that defensive front seven is incredible." And I say, yeah, except it's really a defensive front four.
Yeah.
Because who plays on both sides of Dexter Lawrence? And are any of those guys more than just, roster fill because they don't have better players? I don't know the answer to that right now.
Yeah, it's a big question mark, obviously, because look, if Shane Bowen's going to depend on that front seven, we know who the starting line.
When you're in Hard Knocks and you're talking about the possibility that Ryder Anderson, who spent last year on the practice squad and couldn't crack the roster over guys like DJ Davidson and all of that, when you're talking about the possibility that Ryder Anderson could be one of your key defensive linemen, you don't have enough defensive linemen.
Mm-hmm. Don't forget Boogie Basham too, who
that's another scary one. It's funny because I tend to think, and Boogie Basham became a Giant last year because he's one of Joe Shane's guys. Really, I think Joe was largely responsible for bringing him to Buffalo. There's a relationship there. Joe had an opportunity to bring him in, and he did. But Boogie Basham's history is as a wide nine sort of, defensive end more than anything else. And the only reason for optimism about Boogie Basham is that role didn't really exist in Wink Martindale's defense, but it does in Shane Bowen's. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's a fit there. Maybe there's a way to get some production out of Basham, but he's a guy that's never lived up to the status of being a second round pick.
All right, Ed, final question. I think I know what your answer is going to be, but I'm going to ask it anyway in the event that you surprise me. What is the one thing, if you could pick one thing that this team needs to accomplish, the one question it needs to have answered coming out of camp, it would be what?
What the configuration of the offensive line is, Patty. We've discussed it. Are they going forward with Evan Neal at right tackle and Jermaine Illuminor at left guard? And something that I found interesting, Patty, I think I mentioned earlier, I had Brandon Thorne on my show last week. And Brandon, who runs the Trench Warfare site, works with Duke Manyweather at OL Masterminds, and works in a couple of other places as well. He's one of the foremost authorities that I know, and I think that on offensive line play. And he told me that he has always thought Jermaine Illuminor was a better guard than a tackle. So if he's correct about that, and he knows a lot more about this stuff than I do, if he's correct about that, cross your fingers that Evan Neal can at least be adequate out at right tackle and can stay healthy, because that might be the best scenario for the Giants in terms of putting together a decent offensive line. But for me, you can't go through what the Giants went through a year ago with this whole musical chairs and a different offensive line every week. And, because if that's going to happen, Daniel Jones is going to be broken by week 3 and it's going to be a mess.
Yeah, for sure. We can't have that happening again, because I don't know about you, Ed, but I'd like to start writing about winning teams, some wins before I forget how to do it.
I need to go to the dictionary for that one, Patty. Winning?
Oh, goodness gracious. All right, my friend. Always good seeing you. That's going to do it for us today on Locked On Giants, Giant Fans. So thank you again for tuning in. Thanks to Ed Valentine. And be sure to check out his show. I'm going to be on his show as well as all his work over on Big Blue View. For Ed Valentine, I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Make sure you keep it here tomorrow. Sean Stiletto will be my guest. So we'll see you then.